an amazing conversation for us. It is a real treat. I think, as you guys know, I'm Joe. I'm the founder of Groundwork Projects, and I'm here with the amazing, incredible, extraordinary Anneshia Hardy, founding executive director of Alabama Values, a grassroots communication organization, and Alabama Values Progress, a media advocacy organization based out of Montgomery, Alabama. Both organizations work with civic and grassroots organizations across all of Alabama to break down barriers to civic engagement and counter mis and disinformation. God bless you for that at this moment. So, Anneshia, one, it's so great to see you again. Thank you for doing it.
Yes, likewise.
Great to be with you. Just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, how you came to start Alabama Values and Alabama Values Progress.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, Joe. Look, Anneshia Hardy, the executive director of Alabama Values Progress, and I am a narrative strategist, a community storyteller, and a proud Black Southern woman who believes deeply in the power of narrative to shape what people believe is possible. I also tell folks that I'm a daughter of the Deep South. I often say that I walk in the legacy of freedom fighters and truth tellers. And, my work is grounded in the belief that, narrative and messaging isn't just about storytelling, that it is about reclaiming our freedom and our liberation. Right. So, I launched Alabama Values, our nonpartisan 501c3 arm, because too many of our people were being left out of the story. Or worse, they were being lied to about their place in the story. And so the issue wasn't just misinfo, disinfo. It was, in my opinion, a systemic misdirection designed to maintain, power by keeping us disoriented. And we're dealing with that now, right? And so I said, we need a social, political, and cultural home that could cut through the noise and reclaim the mic. And then there's our sister org, Alabama Values Progress, our 501c4 arm, where, we move with a lot of purpose and power. I tell folks all the time, like, this is where our resistance, becomes strategy, where we leverage culture and creativity and narrative and messaging to break misinfo and disinfo, and really center the lived experiences of the communities who are often pushed, into the margins to build what, we're calling liberated futures. But ultimately, both organizations, approach the work through a dismantling, also, anti-Blackness lens, like a lens that recognizes that anti-Blackness as a foundational force in shaping U.S. institution and culture. And what do I mean by that? When we think about white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and how it's interwoven in our legal, educational, healthcare, and economic system, that it's important for us to dismantle that. Because now we're seeing in present day, those same tactics are being used to further marginalize other groups, like the LGBTQ plus community, the immigrant community, the communities that identify as women, and so, our work just really seeks to disrupt those patterns. Like, we're trying to build new structures of accountability and, truth telling. So, and power sharing. And so we don't just challenge the outcomes, Joe, like, we really interrogate the root, and then we organize from the root towards something that's more liberatory, something that is whole. And for us, this means just not naming the harm, but actively really working to uproot it. So, yeah, that's me in the orgs in a nutshell.
Anneshia, you're amazing. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your energy, your enthusiasm, your excitement, your dedication, all of this. Thank you for being you. And look, I want to dive right into this conversation because from what I hear, Alabama Values Progress has been very active in the current legislative session in the Alabama State Capitol, tracking a number of harmful bills. You're amplifying the voices of people from across Alabama, and you are holding elected officials accountable. You already mentioned accountability. So give folks that are tuning in a little rundown of the legislative session, how it's gone this year, and what you're up against. And please, on the incredible State House Chronicles series that AVP has produced this session, which is amazing, and the pro-democracy scorecard that's launched. All of that.
Yes. So all the things, right? So the ledge session, let's just start here. And it's probably not just Alabama, it's probably across the, especially the South, states with these GOP supermajorities. It has been intense. We've seen relentless attacks on voting rights, criminal, justice reform, LGBTQ plus rights, education, and oh my gosh, our immigrant communities have really been taking a hit, this session. And what we're up against, this isn't just bad policy. I do want to point out that, this is a coordinated political playbook designed to silence, surveil, and strip away our freedoms under the whole guise of governance. That's what we're seeing, right? Whether it's scaling back, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, under the guise of creating fair environments, right? Erasing, honest conversations around race and gender, and criminalizing, teachers and librarians for acknowledging the lived realities of folks. We saw bills that would allow local law enforcement to collaborate with ICE, targeting immigrant, communities for surveillance and policing and criminalization, and legislation that invalidates out-of-state driver's license issued to immigrants. These are not isolated attacks. Like, I do want to point out, like, this is part of a larger authoritarian blueprint. And I think folks need to keep that in mind. And that's why we launched the State House Chronicles, which is a video series that airs during, session, unpacking, what is happening in the State House in plain language, but through the voices of everyday community members and advocates and organizers and policy folks who are showing up at the State House. And so this strategy, it wasn't just about education. It was really about demystifying power and making the legislative process feel accessible and accountable to the people most impacted by it. And so we felt that by documenting these policy battles in real time, that we're not only documenting, we're equipping our communities with tools of resistance. We often say that knowledge is power, right? And so we also were building a historical record on how people power shows up to challenge the status quo. And so we also paired the State House Chronicles with our pro-democracy scorecard, which drops after session later this summer. I'm super excited about that. And it tracks where lawmakers stand and stood, when it came to defending democracy. The scorecard will show the past 3 years of voting pattern for legislators, state legislators. And so we're not just calling out the harm. We're building tools for people to see clearly and connect the dots and take action. Like, we want people to see who are the champions, or who are the barriers to democracy. Like I say all the time that, these officials, that they work for us, right? And just like with any employer, if an employee isn't doing a good job, what do you do, Joe? If they're not doing a good job, what do you do?
Right.
Performance review, and we've been doing that for the past couple of years. If they keep failing the performance reviews, what do? We fire these folks. And so I need people to know that, these officials work for us. And if they can't do their job, then we need to fire them at the poll. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Do your job, represent the people, not political parties. And so, and I just, and so this was really important for us as we thought about the State House Chronicles, the pro-democracy scorecard. We really wanted to just connect the dots for folks so that they can be a part of the change that we want to see in our state.
I mean, so much of that is just, I think, incredibly powerful. But look, as I've tried to think about the steps, the processes here, right, from a former elected official, and what you would have to go through when you're going out talking to people about, hey, this is what I said I was going to do, this is what we tried to do, this is what we did, maybe this is what we couldn't do because other guys are in charge or whatever else. But you need agency, you need accountability, you need transparency, you need those systems that can go out there and spread a message out, but then can hold folks in power to account, right? And all of those tactics that you're talking about, that narrative story, that narrative build, that those scorecards, that sense of accountability to say, hey, we're out there, we're looking, and we're willing to support you, and we want the folks that are going to be our champions to be rewarded for doing so, but we're also going to hold power to account for the folks that continue to put up those roadblocks. Like, we know, we see you, we hear you, and you can't duck us, right? We're going to be here. So just amazing work. And something that I think you're doing so well is you are, just as you said, you're putting people over politics, right? So a key piece to all this is sharing truthful and accurate, and let me focus on that again, truthful and accurate information about what is happening in our local governments. So for folks tuning in, Anneshia, tell us a little bit about what Alabama Values Progress and Alabama Values, are doing to combat mis and disinformation, because it is running rampant across our society and around the world at the moment.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I'll say this. So we believe that, narrative and messaging is infrastructure. And I think you just hit on that a little bit just now. And so misinfo and disinfo, it thrives in the absence of
Mhm.
trusted messengers. It thrives in the absence of cultural context. And so, our approach is layered. So we blend strategic messaging with visual storytelling, embedded, in organizers' digital spaces, and we test. We do message testing to test what motivates and what demotivates audiences across race, class, and geography. We recently launched our Southern Narrative Project to deepen this work, with the goal of building narrative power in Alabama and across the South by investing in local voices who can speak to both the heart and the head. That's important. And this project is rooted in the belief that, in Alabama and also our Southern communities, we deserve not only to be seen, but to be narrators of our own stories, especially in a political climate that often seeks to erase us. And so, this project is thanks to the support of Sony through their Sony Create Action Grant. So super excited about that. We've been able to expand this vision into tangible media justice work. That's what I call it, right? Partnering with universities, grassroots organizers, artists, and creatives to craft messages that shift public understanding, but also push back against the pervasive narratives that are out there. And most importantly, to make space for imagination as a tool of resistance. I think it's so important for us to invest in this type of work because this builds the type of power that we often don't talk about, right? We talk about political power, we talk about economic power, but we rarely talk about ideological power. The power to have, the power of believing what could be and should be. And that is something that we are finding a lot of these communities who are being pushed into the margins. That is the power that's being attacked, in these communities, the power of public perception and what is possible. And so we fall into apathy. We fall into not showing up. We fall into hopelessness. We fall into not being able to collectively, plan together, strategize together, love each other, all these things. And so again, narrative is infrastructure. I come from a school of thought where I had to, like when I started doing PR and messaging work, we had to prove our worth. We had to actually show like, this is something, this is part of the strategy. And I think we're now in our pro-democracy spaces, I'm finding that folks who are doing narrative and messaging, we're having to say, look, this is like key to the strategy. This couples with the organizing, the policy, like all of that work.
So, like what you talk about, and it seems it seems almost tried to say it, but humanity has been passed down by narrative for thousands of years, right? I mean, and so storytelling. I mean, yes. I when I go off to schools now or what, I go talk to young people. They say, I always tell them like the one skill that I wish somebody had told me I needed to develop when I was in college was storytelling, right? And you kind of do it tangentially from reading a whole bunch of books and reading those stories and the famous ones throughout American literature, but the ability to be able to tell that story and to craft that narrative and to be able to hold an audience. I mean, all of that, how important that is to our communities, to our narrative of our nation, narrative life, to our identities, all of it. Right? It's a story, and the story that we tell ourselves, the story that we tell others, the story that pulls us together, and we see that obviously under attack in so many different ways today through the use of misinformation and disinformation and anonymity and the power of that tool and the lack of accountability, which is why, again, the accountability work that you're doing is so amazing. And so I want to keep going on this, right? I want you to talk a little bit about.
Before you go on, Joe, because you said something. No, when you talk about, listen, Joe, but you said something. I don't think people realize that storytelling is our first language. It is universal. It moves across culture and time. That's why oftentimes a good story would trump rationale, no pun intended. but literally, we see people adopting false political realities because of a good story. You know what I'm saying? A story they can see themselves in, a story that speaks to the echo chamber they've created. Don't let facts get in the way of a good story, right? Exactly. Don't let facts get, like, that's where we are. And so, we're trying to figure, okay, The science is a science, because there's neuroscientific research that points out that when we encounter a good story, our brain does something cool. It releases oxytocin, which is known as the empathy hormone, right? The feel good hormone. And so, to your point, like, how can we, on the pro-democracy side, like, it's time for us to reclaim our stories. It's time for us to leverage these strategies, like these tools that are organic to just very basic, our basic, like, human being, right? So, but go ahead, Joe.
No, I
had to
appreciate
chime
you chiming in there, but I want you to chime in again. I want you to tell us about We Shall Today.
Yes, We Shall Today. Look now, okay. So We Shall Today is our sister org, Alabama Values. So We Shall Today is a celebration. It's a call to action, actually. It's in partnership with the We Shall Someday Project, and also legacy organizations and movement leaders across Alabama, rooted in, the truth that joy, our resistance, and our imagination has always been a part of the fight for liberation. And so the We Shall Someday Project is an initiative that really brings together this powerful music called We Shall Someday to communities along the historic 1961 Freedom Rise route. And so AV, we came up with We Shall Today along with our partners, because yes, we're honoring history and legacy, but we're talking about today, right? And so through this collaboration, we're hosting events across the state of Alabama and working our way to DC that honors the Freedom Rides, while making space for today's freedom dreamers, and artists and activists and youth and elders. And these gatherings, they take place not just in museums or historical sites, but in community spaces where movement work is alive and still unfolding. And so, we just, this past, few weeks, we've just come off curating intergenerational panels, youth art workshops, storytelling, campaigns. We had a community block party that centered the lived experiences as legitimate, remembering, but then also, civic engagement opportunities. And so, yes, this is about legacy. Yeah. But it's also about movement continuity, because we're not just inheriting history. I often say this, that we are shaping the future. And so through the We Shall Today, we're bridging the gap between past and present. And like I said, we definitely honor the legacy, but to activate it in real time, that's what the We Shall Today is about. And so through this project, we help, remind people that joy is a strategy, and our collective memory is a tool, and that storytelling is a form of organizing.
Amen. Right. Amen. And a really powerful form of organizing. I mean, not for nothing, those stories get shared and they get passed down, and they get, they are what pulls people together, and it's what they were over time, kind of that basis, fundamental building block for communities, for identities, for families, right? So I love all of that. And I got another couple questions for you here, though. But I really want to just give you the floor for a second, because I want you to tell us a little bit about what you have coming up, what you're seeing in front of you, what this rest of this landscape looks like. We're only a couple months into 2025 here. So tell us kind of what you see coming around the corner. And I know you've got a couple other narrative initiatives out there, particularly the Southern Narrative Collective Project. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of emotion right now. We're expanding. We're expanding our Southern Narrative Project, like really deepening collaborations with the artists and organizers and universities, and building out a civic media hub that supports, rural and BIPOC communities with tools to tell their own stories. All right. We're also rolling out our Defend the Ballot teach-in. Folks can learn more about that by visiting defendtheballot.org. And that is an intentional series of community-based teach-ins, workshops designed to connect the dots between history, policy, and political power. And, these aren't your average, civic education sessions. Like, we are grounding folks in legacy. We're lifting up stories of resistance that came before us, while also equipping communities with the tools to confront like misinfo, disinfo, voter suppression tactics. Like, we have to get back to, uh, I often say that if we turn to our ancestors, there's a blueprint, right, on how to do this work. Right. And so, we're really spending time and pulling back from that blueprint. So the teachings, kind of like, a nod to the freedom schools before, we can actually be in the public schools and be like having our, third political homes and spaces to where we can learn and strategize, together. And so, yeah, these teachings are rooted in place-based storytelling, and it's really tailored to, identifying like local concerns and ensuring that people really walk away not informed, but just really connected to one another. And I think, what excites me most, is our commitment to building power, but not performatively, structurally. Through like the narrative, work that we're doing, like out of the Southern Narrative Project, this is also connected to our pipeline program where we're training the next generation of storytellers. Out of the teaching, this is connected, and these teachings are happening not just in Alabama, but they're going to be happening across, with other partners across the South. We're hoping to like bridge, although Alabama Values and Alabama Values Progress is focusing on the teachings in Alabama. We're tapping out partners in other states like Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, to host like those teachings. Because one thing we can agree on is that the South has like unique similarities, right? In terms of the types of attacks and issues that we deal with. And this is not incidental, this is coordinated. And so our defense is to join together and strategize together to mitigate, future attacks. And so to hold the line, to hold progress, because we turn on the TV and we see, we feel like we're losing so much, right? And so yes, so those are kind of like and I also want to point out, we're really big on visual storytelling. So we also have some mini docuseries that are rolling out. I'm super excited about The People's Voice. We have been following the fight for fair maps for the past, since 2021, in Alabama and Louisiana. And, now that Alabama, we finally have a ruling, like our maps are in place for the next decade. We've come to a close on documenting this journey. And so we're now in post editing, and we're looking forward to really, really, really highlighting The People's Voice. That's the name of the documentary, The People's Voice, Redistricting Through a Community's Lens. This film documented everything from the public hearings to the debates, to the community organizing, the cultural organizing, going to DC multiple times. Like, it pulls it all together for folks. And this is so we don't forget as we gear up for the next cycle. We also have a docuseries that is coming out around the Black maternal mortality rate, and the fight for reproductive justice across the South. Just really trying to use film to foster dialogue around very difficult to have, conversations. So those are the things that we have going on.
Just that.
And I do want to plug my Groundworks project, fam. If I can. Yeah, okay. Like, I want to say, you all, when we stood up Alabama Values Progress, you all have been definitely on our 501c4 side. One of our biggest supporters, and you continue to be like one of our biggest supporters today. So I appreciate the investment in the vision. And by doing so, it has been an investment in community, in building community power in our state. So I appreciate you, Joe, you and the Groundworks Project team.
We are so grateful for you, for the work that you do, for the energy that you bring to it, for the vision and the clarity of purpose. And, what you are aiming to do is nothing short of make a country live up to its promises of its founding documents. And to know that we're not there yet. But because of folks like you, we're getting closer, even sometimes with some tougher resistance that we should have. I want to give you the final word to close out here, but let me just say, Anneshia, we're so grateful for you, for sharing this time with us, for being able to talk to folks that are tuning in and learn a little bit more about what you're up to and what you're doing and how we can learn from you. But last words are yours, and thank you.
Yeah, no. So last words. I want to shout out the South. I want to shout out Alabama and shout out the South. I think the South has always been a battleground, right? It has been the birthplace for radical change. And, shout out to my team, Team AV, Team AVP, and also our partners. Our work is really grounded in that legacy, right? That the South represents, from the Montgomery Burns boycotts to the foot soldiers who marched in Selma. Alabama has always held both the trauma and the blueprint. And, I think, at Alabama Values and Alabama Values Progress, we're constantly asking, how do we carry forward that fire in a way that speaks, to this generation? How do we build narrative power that not only defends our people, but frees them? And so, we understand that the stories we tell shape the policies we accept and the futures we believe are possible. That's that ideological power I was talking about. And that's why we use narrative not just as a tool of resistance, but as a pathway to freedom. And so, whether it's confronting voter suppression through grassroots media work or using creative storytelling, to highlight and amplify the lived experiences, like our work really honors the power of language and stories to disrupt and to rebuild and to reimagine. And so, as I said, I want to shout out Alabama and shout out the South. We are reclaiming the South, not as a region frozen in time or trauma, but as a living, breathing site of possibility. And, our narratives like challenge erasure, push back against this revisionist history folks trying to do, and really make space for, a future where our communities, are the authors of their own liberation. And so I thank everyone who may be tuning in, who's rocking with like that ideology and who stands with organizations like Alabama Values Progress. Like we are in this together. And, and I just thank everyone for the support.
I'm grateful for you.